Hello, my name is Lynn Oakes. Welcome to the Blue Acorn Woolens studio, where weaving is a daily adventure. Today we are going to assemble, warp, and weave on the Acorn Tapestry loom. First, congratulations on your purchase of an Acorn loom. The Acorn loom comes in a bag. Everything is complete, so when you're not using the loom, it stores very easily in a small space. You should have inside the bag two sides, two upright pieces that make up the left and the right hand side of your loom. You should have a bag that contains all the nuts and bolts and a warping cube, one for each side. You should have two long screws, two shorter screws, two wingback, two other bolts, and various asunder spacers. Inside you have two large dowels. One will be your top beam and one will be your bottom beam. You should have three smaller dowels, a set of written instructions. That's it. You don't need any special tools to assemble your loom. First you set up the two sides. The Acorn loom is handcrafted, each loom made individually by J. Couch in the Couch Workshop right outside of Indianapolis. Jay is also a weaver along with being a woodworker, which helps when you're making looms so you know exactly what you're doing. I'm putting the bottom beam in. I've got my two sides set up. When you set up the two sides, you want to make sure that the leg part is on the outside. I've got my bottom beam in, and now I'm going to put the top beam in. Pretty simple so far. Now I'm going to look for two washers here and the smaller screw. Turn this around so you can see. Right here on the side we have a small piece and a longer piece. I'm going to put the screw in, the small piece, and then line it up, put it in the big piece, put a washer on, take one of my wing nuts and screw it on. So there's one side finished. Now I'm going to turn around and do the other side. I've got the small screw, put it through a washer, through the outside hole, then the inside piece, take my wing nut and screw it on. Now the basic loom is ready to go. We have pictures that were found on Egyptian tombs of this particular loom, a version of it, from thousands of years ago. We're going to put the warping cubes on now. The warping cubes are pretty nifty. When you're not using them, they fit on the back of your loom out of the way. It's a nice feature. If you're like me, I'm always losing little parts and trying to figure out where they belong. So I have the warping cube. It has a hole that goes all the way through. I'm going to take my long screw, put a washer on it, put it through that hole. You'll also notice that there are holes on the edges of the warping cubes. You want this hole to be facing the middle and at the top. So we're going to take this, put it through the hole that's already on the side of the loom. Take our wing nut in the back and screw it on. The other one is going to fit on the other side the same way. Be sure that you have the hole that's on the edge near the top and facing the middle. Through the warping cube and through the hole on the loom. And we're ready to go. Okay, I'm going to take one of the smaller dowel rods and put it in the hole here and on the other side. You may have to stretch your loom out a little bit here to get this in. There we go. And now we're ready to do the warping. Warp threads generally run vertical on this type of loom. On a floor loom, they would run this direction away from you. Warp threads have to have one thing, and that is very little or no give. So when you stretch your warp thread, it's taut. There's no give to it. I'm using carpet warp, cotton carpet warp. You can use linen. You can even use wool or any other fiber as long as it has very little give to it when you pull it. I'm going to start by tying my warping thread onto the little dowel rod, which is, tighten this one up a little, in the warping cubes. Now, what we're going to do is warp this loom with a continuous warp. If you have a continuous warp, that means that I can weave something double this length. It also allows me to move the weaving around as I weave. So first of all, I've tied it on to the small dowel rod. I'm going to go up and over the top beam, down and around the lower beam, back up to the small dowel rod. Now this is where people make their mistake. Every time you get to this small dowel rod, you have to go around it and go back the way you came. So I'm going to go back around the bottom beam, up around the top beam. I'm going to try to space these about 1/4 of an inch apart. They don't have to be exact because I'm going to mess with this warp quite a bit before I actually start weaving. Now we're ready to warp the Acorn loom. When you're looking for threads for your warping threads, you want to make sure that you have a thread or yarn that has little or no give to it. In other words, when you stretch it, it doesn't stretch more. It's taut. Little or no give in it. What I'm using today is carpet warp. This is cotton. String would work, linen, even wool or other animal fibers, as long as they have very little give to them. They have to be able to be fairly tight and tight throughout the weaving. Wool is a little tricky because it has a tendency to change on you. Okay, what I'm doing is I'm just tying a regular knot, just a plain old square knot. If you want to get fancy and put a weaver's knot on it, whatever, onto the small dowel rod. Now this is where the tricky part comes in. We're going to warp this with a continuous warp, which means that we'll be able to weave a piece twice the length of the loom. You can make it smaller than that, but you have that maximum length. You also can move the weaving up and down as you weave, which makes it easier to do. Alright, so I've tied on to this small dowel. I'm going to go up and over the top beam with my warp thread, down and under the bottom beam. So I've tied on, I've gone over the top beam, now I'm going around the bottom beam, I'm going up to the small dowel rod. Now this is where people make the mistake when they're warping this way. Every time that you go around this little dowel rod, you must go back the direction you came. So I'm going to go around the dowel rod and I'm going to go back around the bottom beam exactly the way that I came. I came on the front here, so I'm going back that way. Then I'm going to go back up to the top, around the top beam, and down to the dowel rod. Now remember, every time you get to the small dowel rod, you want to go around it and go back exactly the way you came. I came the front of the beam, so I'm going to go back up to the beam on the front. I'm going to space these about 1/4 of an inch apart. You don't have to be exact at this point. Pretty close, but you can go back and change that and straighten it up later. Alright, I'm going to go back. I went around the top beam. I'm going back around the bottom beam. And here I am to this little dowel rod again. I go around the little dowel rod and back the way that I came, which is the front of the lower beam. This is the process, and you want to repeat it over and over and over again until you get the width that you want. You don't have to keep it super tight while you're doing this, fairly taut, but you don't ever want this so extremely tight that you can't move the little dowel rod when you get ready to. And you can always go back when we get done putting the threads on. We'll go back and even out the tension and take out the slack. Right now we're just trying to get the threads on. Here I am down to the little dowel rod. I go completely around the little dowel rod, back up to the top beam, and down to the bottom beam, back to this little dowel rod, and I have to think to myself, okay, I've got to go around the little dowel rod and go back exactly the way I came. The nice thing about having warping cubes is that you can do this by yourself. Otherwise, you'd have to have somebody hold this for you until you got to the point where it would stay stationary on its own. I'm going to keep wrapping this around. I'm going to back up. I went around the lower beam. I'm going back up to the top beam. What this does is it creates a continuous warp that's fashioned around the small dowel rod. The nice thing when you're finished weaving, if you weave from this edge of the dowel rod all the way to the other edge, the whole warp is woven, you can take the stick out, the small stick, and you have a finished product. No finishing process is needed. All the edges are finished. Very similar to a Navajo weaving, which when you take it off the loom, it's completely done. All 4 sides with selvages, which is kind of nice if you don't like to do finishing. Okay, I put a little bit more warp on the loom, and now we have the moment of truth. It's very easy to make a mistake the first time. Even I made a few mistakes putting this one on. There's always mistakes. The trick is to catch them as soon as you can. So when you get through warping, there's an easy way to check to see if you have warped it correctly. I'm going to take off the warping blocks on both sides. I think I am anyway. The nice thing about the warping blocks is that you can store them on the back of your loom, out of the way, ready there for the next time that you need them. Take the warping block off on this side. Take the one off on this side. Okay, now, moment of truth. If you have warped this correctly, then this dowel rod should move. If it doesn't move, you have a mistake somewhere. One of the quickest ways to find a mistake is to look here between the front and the back of your warp. If there's a crossed thread in there, that's where your mistake is. So you have to go back and undo until you get to that mistake and correct it. My mother was a knitting instructor, and people ask her what was the most difficult thing about knitting, and she would always reply, ripping out. And it's the same with weaving or any type of craft. You've got to go back and find your mistake and correct it. Some mistakes, to be honest with you, I can live with. My mother would also say, every handmade thing has a mistake in it somewhere. That's what makes it handmade. But when it comes to your warp, you can't have a mistake where this won't move. Actually, you can't have a mistake. So I passed the test here. My little dowel rod moves freely up and down. Now what I'm going to do is to go back and even out my tension. For a tapestry loom, the tension has to be fairly tight. But if it's so tight that you can barely move this or can't move it at all, your little dowel rod, then it's too tight. As you weave, your warp threads will tighten up more and more as your weft threads go in. So you have to give yourself a little leeway. The most important thing in weaving for your warp threads is that they have the same tension. If you have one area looser and another area tighter, you're going to be fighting it the whole weaving. So what I'm going to do is go back and check for tightness, get rid of all the slack pieces. I mean, you're going to be surprised when you do this how much extra slack you have. I'm just following the path, and again, I'm not worried too much about having it exactly spaced. My final goal is about 1/4 of an inch apart on the warp threads. But right now I'm working on getting rid of this excess slack. I've only done a few, and you can see already I have some excess thread. Okay, I've worked across my warp here, and I've taken out the excess slack, pulling on the thread, getting it just right, and not surprisingly, when I've gotten to the very end here, you can see I have quite a bit of slack. So I'm going to tighten it up. And again, I'm going to put a knot here. Just a plain old square knot will do the trick. A good way to check your tension is just put your hand across it. If you feel a spot that's much looser than another, then go back again and work the slack out until you get it to the tightness and consistency that you want all the way across. Now we're ready to do the twining at the bottom. The twining in this weaving, and this type of weaving, and also in a Navajo weaving, is your spacer. It keeps your threads the right distance apart and makes for a nice edging if you want to leave it in, or if you don't, you can take it out. So now we're going to do some twining. What you need to look for is a thick yarn that is the thickness that you want your warp threads to be, spaced apart. So let's go see if we can find some really thick yarn to use. Now we're ready to do the twining edging for our weaving. The twining is going to serve a purpose to space our threads, the warp threads, the same distance apart and keep them that way. However, it can also have a decorative edge to it. Here's a small weaving that was woven on an Acorn loom, and you can see the twining, which is this edging at the top and at the bottom, is part of the design element. If you ever get a real Navajo weaving, it will also have this edging, this knot with the tail on it on all four corners. Twining is what is used in Navajo weaving to space the threads, but it's also an integral part of the weaving. You don't have to leave the twining in. You can have it just while you're weaving and then take it out. If we look at this particular weaving, this weaving was woven vertically, but it hangs this way. But you can see on the edge here that the twining has been taken out. It still gives you a nice finished edge, it just doesn't have the twining in it. So let's get to business on how do you do this. I have two different colors here of fairly thick thread, thick yarn to use for twining. You can do it all with the same color, 3 different colors, 4 different colors, whatever. But to learn the technique, I find it's much easier to start off with 2 different colors. So I have a greenish color and a dark charcoal gray here, so that I can see the difference in the 2 threads. To start off with, I'm going to make an overhand knot and leave myself a little bit of a tail, just like that. Now, how much thread do I need? Well, I haven't put on very many warp threads here. This is what I usually do. I measure across twice, add about 12 more inches for the tail and excess. I don't want to run out. I know that I'm going to go across 3 times, so I think I'll put 1 more. It's always better to have too much than not enough. Now when you're working on the loom, until you get to a certain point, it's difficult to tell the front threads from the back threads. One way to help this is to put in a piece of paper. And now I'm only looking at the threads that are in the front. If I get the paper in right. And I have a little bit easier visual field to work on. Alright, now we're ready to do the twining. As with a lot of things, the first row of the twining is the most difficult. I'm going to take my 2 threads that I've already tied together and take one of them behind the first thread. And I'm going to leave the knot right there. Okay, I went behind the first thread here with gray, and then I'm going to drop it. I'm going to pick up my greenish colored thread, and I'm going to go to the next thread. This is a little tricky to figure out what the next thread is. That's why I went up here to the top, followed it down, and I'm going behind that thread with the green and drop it. Then I pick up the gray thread again. I go to the 3rd warp thread and wrap it around, just like that. So you get a 2-tone effect here. I drop that one, pick up the green, go to the next thread, drop the green one, pick up the one in the back. And I do this all the way across. Now, you don't want to pull this super tight. If this doesn't come out to be the spacing that you want your threads to be, you have a couple options. You can put 2 of these together. You can use smaller threads if you want your threads closer together. We're going to continue this all the way across to the end. Okay, I've done my first row of twining, and I'm ready to turn around and go back for the second row. The very last thread, I used the green yarn, twining yarn. So for the second row going back, I'm going to use the gray thread. So I come up here with the gray thread, go around the first thread, second thread with the green, let it go. Pick up the gray one, third one. Let it go. Pick up the green one, the next thread. And I'm going to do this all the way across. Just remember not to pull it too tight. That's kind of a general rule of thumb in weaving. Be careful not to pull it too tight. I'm going to continue that all the way across. Okay, I've finished my second row across, and you can see I'm getting a little bit more uniform spacing between my warp threads. Nice edge here. Alright, now you have to remember the last thread that I used, I went behind with green. So I drop that, pick up the gray, go behind with gray. Then the next thread will be green, the next one will be gray, green, oops, went behind two instead of just one, green, gray, all the way across. Okay, I've done my twining, 3 rows, across, back, and across again. Then at the end, I'm going to do that overhand knot. Snug it up here to the weaving. And then I'm going to cut off the excess just to get it out of my way. And I'm ready to start weaving. Actually, not ready to start weaving. This is your twining for the bottom edge. Now we're going to put another set of twining up here, a little bit higher. That'll keep the threads completely straight as we weave. Okay, here's our loom with the twining at the bottom, 3 rows, and another 3 rows a little bit farther up. This twining will move as you weave. You can see now we have our threads are nicely spaced. We don't have to worry about them getting too close or too far apart because we have our twining here to hold them in place. Twining, as you weave, you move. Let me show you this example here of a weaving in progress. Here's a weaving in progress, and you can see up here this was the bottom twining, which was originally down here, and as the weaving progressed, it moved around so that you don't have to reach up here and you can utilize the whole length of the continuous warp. This is the top twining, which has been moving along as we weave. You can see this is where it started, kept going, and kept going, except instead of moving the whole loom, we just moved the weaving, scooted it around, and now we're here. But the twining is still moving with us to keep these threads spaced. Now we're finally ready to start weaving. I think everybody has to develop their own style. So I'll show you basically the way I do this, and then you can go from there. I usually use a needle, a yarn needle that has a great big eye in it, so it's easy to thread, but you don't have to. Sometimes I just use my fingers. But what we're going to do is weave the basic plain weave. This is essential that you get this technique down pat. Otherwise, you'll have major issues with your edges. If you ask any weaver what is the most difficult thing to do, they will say keeping your edges straight. The mark of a good weaver is how good their edges are. That being said, it's almost impossible to get a completely perfectly straight edge. I'm going to do this just like if you ever wove pot holder when you were a kid or did paper weaving in school. Over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, all the way across. Now the definition of tapestry weaving is that the thread does not go all the way across. But for these first few rows, that's what we're going to do. We're going to just leave this tail here for now. Now, most people make this mistake. They think, okay, all I have to do is go straight across, and that'll do it. Well, pretty soon you're going to have edges coming in if you go straight across and just pack it in. Because as the weft thread goes across, it's taking up space depth-wise. So if you go straight across, you're not allowing for that slight little difference as it goes over and under. So when you do tapestry, this is the most critical thing. About every 2 or 3 inches, you've got to have a bubble. And you pack that down. I'm using this tapestry comb. You can pack it down with your fingers or whatever. Same thing over here. I've got a little half bubble. Very critical that you do that. Otherwise, these threads in the middle are going to start pulling in, causing the sides to come in, and you will have a mess. The other tricky thing about weaving, I'm going over, under, over, under. If I went over the time before, I'm going to go under this time. The other tricky thing is, what are you going to do here on this edge? Right here. This is another problem area that people have when they're weaving. They want to make that turn and then pull it. And you see what happened, I pull it and this thread goes in. Next thing you know, this one goes in, and then I have a weaving that does this. So again, you have to leave a little excess. You don't want to leave a huge loop, but you want to leave it loose. So here I am doing my over under. The best thing to do is to weave about 2 to 3 inches. Remember that all important bubble. Gotta have it. And then pack it in. Just like that. It's better to have this edge a little loose than a little tight. Well, let's just suppose we're going to go ahead and go all the way across. This is so critical, and what I have seen happen in classes that I've given is people will start off doing this bubble, but then they get all into the weaving and the design and all the fun and everything, and they forget about the bubble. And the next thing you know, they have a weaving that's coming in on the edges. That bubble is so important. You just have to have the bubble. It just won't work without it. And you see I've gotten a little loose here, but that's okay. It's better to be a little excess than a little tight. Now if you remember, I said the definition for a tapestry is that the thread does not go all the way across. So let's just suppose that I'm booking along here and I decide that I don't want this green thread to go any farther than that. So what do? I got my bubble. Don't ever forget the bubble. It is so critical. I don't want any more green right here, so I'm going to turn around and go back with my green. Just like so. And I've decided, well, you know, can't forget my bubble here. Gotta have it. On this side over here, I've decided to put in another color. I think I'll just put in some purple. The nice thing about working on this little tapestry loom, one of the nice things, I like to use up my excess little bits of yarn. You know, you got that gorgeous yarn that you used and you've got a little bit of it left over and you just can't part with it, so you can use it in a weaving. It doesn't take gobs and gobs of yarn to work on this little tapestry loom, which is one nice thing about it. Okay, so I put in purple, and if you notice I did that with my fingers. You don't have to have a needle. It's whatever you want to do. I've got my bubble, can't forget that. And I've come right up here to where the green stopped. And I'm going to turn around and go back, because I've decided that I want this part of my weaving to have purple. So I'm turning around and going back. Again, do not forget your bubble. Even though I'm doing all these two different colors here, I want to make sure that I have not packed it in too tight. The nice thing too about weaving on this thread's a little bit thicker than this one. That's okay. I'll just put a few more rows in to even it out. Now if I continue this way, what happens is that I'm going to have an opening. That's called a slit. In medieval times when they did tapestries, they left the slit, the weavers did, and then someone would come along and sew on the back with silk thread that opening closed. To fix that opening while you're weaving can be done, it's easy, but it takes time. So they were on a pretty tight time crunch, so the weaver would put the color in where it was supposed to be, and then someone else would come along and sew it up in the back. Well, let's take a look at these. That's pretty basic, but let's take a look at this in a more complicated setting. Alright, this one has all kinds of stuff going on. It's a very complicated pattern with a lot of different colors interacting. Just to make it a little bit easier to see, let's do our paper trick here and put this, cover the back. Now you can see the threads that we're working on. And you'll notice that each section of color has its own piece of yarn. But you'll also see here where the colors are meeting, there's no opening. That's because I'm using a technique called interlocking. And what happens with interlocking is does just like the name says. When you have the two colors that come together, you just hook them together. Just go right through them. Let's do one and you can see it. Makes a lot more sense to see it than it is to hear it. So what I'm doing here, I'm going to go back over, under, just like I did before with this burgundy red. You can make, if you notice, this is a very complicated pattern with a lot of things going on, but if you look at it really closely, it doesn't have that many colors in it. It's only about 5 or 6 colors, but it's still pretty wild pattern. Alright, now I've gotten over here where the purple is. Notice I've got to remember my bubble. And when I run into the purple, I'm going to go in to this row of purple where it looped around. And with my needle, if you're going to do interlocking, you really do need a needle. I'm going to hook it through that loop. And now there won't be any space. So now I'm ready to go back the way I came with the burgundy. People always ask, oh my gosh, what do you do when the two colors come together? Well, you have two choices. You can interlock or you can just leave them. This is why you see a great many diagonals in weavings, especially ancient weavings, because you don't need to interlock if you're on a diagonal. Next time you see a Navajo weaving or Turkish weaving, look at how many diagonals there are. That way the weaver didn't have to worry about interlocking or slit, because the diagonal, like here, took care of it so he didn't have to interlock. And there's no slit. This is a modern tapestry rug woven in Turkey, and you can see the brilliant use of color and shape. What you may not see at first glance is that it's a slit technique. In other words, everywhere that these colors meet in a vertical, there's a slit. Everywhere the two colors meet, see, I've got my finger through, there's a slit. Now, there are advantages to doing a slit technique. One is that it goes quicker than interlocking. The other is that you get a very crisp edge. But notice also the use of diagonals in here, especially on the edges. All of these diagonal areas, there was no need to make a slit or to interlock. These are all very ancient symbols. If you go back thousands of years, you see the same symbols arranged maybe in a different way or modified a little bit that have evolved over the years. It's a very beautiful example of tapestry weaving in the rug slit technique. This is a modern tapestry woven on the Acorn loom, woven this way vertically and then hung horizontally, which is the way most tapestries, especially medieval tapestries, were woven, sideways. The tapestry hangs a lot better if you do that. But if you notice up close, these are all interlocked. Every third row there's an interlock. Because the weaving was going to be hung this way, slits were not a desirable technique to use. I got a chance to look at some very old weavings from ancient weavings. There doesn't seem to be any particular formula for how you interlock as far as how many rows or how many stitches you interlock. It's pretty much whatever works for you. And you can see right here, if that had not been interlocked, then you would have had a big slit. But as it is, every third row there's an interlock. As complicated as this pattern looks, it's only 3 different colors, 3 different balls of yarn. And you can still get a really nice effect.